Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is John Englander. This is about rising sea level. It's the first part, the overview of a multi-part series. I've been involved with the oceans for almost 4 decades. It's been my broad area of expertise, but in the last decade, I've really become fascinated and concerned by issues of climate change, particularly how climate change intersects with the ocean. And sea level rise is the perfect example. When we look at the Earth, we're reminded that the greatest part of this planet is covered by water. Almost 72% of the Earth's surface is ocean. When we look at this image from Google Earth, we see in clear perspective that above North America, the United States and Canada, is Greenland off to the right, and it's a huge island. It's about 3 times the size of the state of Texas. And that ice sheet on Greenland has been there for a couple of million years, and it's a few kilometers thick, more than a mile thick. Antarctica on the right-hand slide, looking straight up at Antarctica, is again an ice sheet that's been there for millions of years. It's also 2 or 3 miles thick. It contains 7 times the amount of ice as Greenland. Between the two of them, they represent the vast majority, more than 90% of the frozen snow and ice on the planet. As those 2 ice sheets melt, they really are the primary determinants of sea level rise. The ice melts, it flows into the ocean and raises the ocean, as you would imagine. But sea level rise is slow. It tends to be imperceptible year to year, so we overlook it. It's going to start having an impact because as the oceans rise, they will truly redefine and reshape the continents. For every foot of sea level rise, the shoreline can move inland hundreds of feet, in some cases more than 1,000 feet. So just a foot of sea level rise may not sound like much, but has a huge impact to us. It's been overlooked because for 5,000 or 6,000 years, sea level hasn't changed very much at all. But in the last century, it started to rise, and in the last 3 decades, the rate of rise has doubled. So the rate of rise is increasing rapidly. We tend to jump to conclusions and misunderstand. We tend to think that perhaps the melting Arctic ice cap is why sea level is rising, and it's not, because the melting Arctic, or the Arctic Ocean around the North Pole is frozen ocean. It's not on land like Greenland and Antarctic. And as that melting sea ice, floating ice, degrades, it doesn't add to the level of the water, just like ice melting in a glass due to Archimedes' principle. What I want you to start to do today is to see the bigger picture and not get distracted by some factoid or some contradictory thing. Let's look at really what's happening to this planet, because I contend that while there will be many things of interest and importance this century, the rise of sea level and the shrinking of the land masses, the continents, will be as great as anything that we, our children and grandchildren, and future generations have to contend with, because it's effectively permanent change from a human timescale. My point is that coastal properties around the world will begin to become worth less, not worthless necessarily, but worth less this century. In fact, I contend that the devaluation could start even this decade, as I will explain further on. What I want to focus you on as a positive outreach or direction from this whole subject is that we need to begin intelligent adaptation. And that, as it implies, is 2 things. Intelligent means we start from the facts, from the truths, and are able to throw aside the contradictory or the distractionary things or perhaps emotional things and basis on reality. And then how do we adapt to it once we recognize that it's going to happen, whether we like it or not? Climate change is confusing, and sea level does tie in with climate change to a degree, but let's just deal with the fact that climate change is a point of confusion and huge controversy. At this point, it's become political, it's become theater, it's become something that people can't even see straight when they talk about. Why? Well, there's global warming on the one hand, but we had record cold winters in North America and Europe in 2010 just passed. We had record snowfalls that allowed some people to declare global warming over. Of course, climate change is a long-term trend, you have to look at a decade, and we'll do that in a later segment. Aside from the warming, we get droughts in some places, but floods and deluges in others. There's more storms and hurricanes, and that tends to be attributed to changing climate patterns and perhaps warming. But then there's some years where there's no more hurricanes or no hurricanes at all. We see marked increase in fires. You probably recall that just 2 years ago in California, I believe, and I think it was even the same year in Australia, there were unbelievable fires that had devastating consequences that hadn't been seen in centuries. Those will also seem to be a pattern of warmer temperatures. So low down on the list, some people say, oh yeah, what about rising oceans? It tends not to be noticed because it tends to happen incrementally. But as we're going to see, the rate is speeding up and the trend is unmistakable, and it will get our attention very soon. Today we're in Florida, and so this slide has particular relevance, but this slide has probably been seen all around the world. It's been in some prominent movies and shows two representations of sea level. On the left hand, 3 feet or 1 meter, and on the right hand, 18 to 20 feet, which is 6 meters, the respective rise. As you can see, in either case, the damage is devastating. Obviously, much more so at the 6 meter rate, the 20 foot level. There's two things I want to help you observe from this. First of all, the destruction of real estate isn't just from sea level rise. It is a combination of sea level rise, which is what's depicted here, but then increased storm damage, those waves from hurricanes, etc., which can be exacerbated if they happen to hit at a high tide cycle. And then erosion, which is the combination effect from waves lapping at the shore, storm damage, etc. So just where you see the point of the shoreline with a nominal sea level rise, assuming it was flat, isn't the end story. The damage is actually worse. Now, the good news is that there is no credible model that says we're going to get 20 foot of sea level rise this century. It likely could happen next century, and could be the latter part of next century. We don't know that quite yet. But 3 to 6 feet is within the realm of predictions now for this century. So we need to be concerned because the damage is very real. Key points I want you to take away from today as we wrap up is that in Earth's history, sea level has changed up and down by more than 600 feet. In the last million years, it's been repeatedly up and down 400 feet in natural cycles during the ice ages. When all the ice melts in Greenland and the Antarctic, sea level will rise by approximately 265 feet, that's 80 meters. Now the good news is that could take 1,000 years. But what we have to think about is what's going to happen this century. What does it mean to us, our families, where we live, where we vacation, etc. Even 3 or 6 feet, that's a meter or two of sea level rise, will have a big impact. And that rate, those projections will increase as warming accelerates. I believe the projections will be refined this decade due to the increased scrutiny and measurements of Greenland and Antarctic, and trying to refine the melt rate and the acceleration of the melt rate, which is really the challenging issue. The melting is increasing so quickly, it's hard to plot the curve. And a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding has come out of that fact, which we'll deal with in a later segment. Part 2 of this series will cover what are the causes of rising sea level. It's not the melting Arctic. We'll explain that in some detail. But we'll look at all the other factors which really are relevant. Greenland, Antarctica, glaciers, thermal expansion, variations in sea level, which is really interesting and surprised me in my research. And then the effect of rising or subsiding continents, which has a minor but noticeable effect on sea level. This is just a quick shot of from the next segment showing a glacier from Greenland heading toward the water. That's about 500 or 600 feet of height there, showing you the enormity of the height of that glacier coming off the ice sheet. Future segments will cover sea level history, the ups and downs, 600 feet, measuring ancient sea levels, natural cycles versus human impacts, why a few feet of sea level rise matter, whether it's practical to hold back the oceans, are seawalls practical, can we slow sea level rise, and then why I believe that intelligent adaptation is the only good return on our investment. Thank you. I hope you join me.